Metro 2035, Dmitry Glukhovsky, Chapter 9, Theater. He spat in the lenses of the gas mask and rubbed them with his finger so that they wouldn't steam up. Then he clicked the switch on the radio and turned it to the right frequency. Come in. Contact in 1 hour. Everything must be installed already. This is the surface. I can't promise in 1 hour. If you don't get in touch in an hour's time, you've either run out on us or croaked. Either way, the old man's dead meat. You haven't been able to contact your own men in 3 days, but you give me good luck. Blank noise again. He sat there for another minute, listening to it, and turned the handle. In order not to hear what. Then he closed his knapsack, pulled on the straps cautiously, got to his feet and carried it away delicately like an injured child, 10 kilos of explosive inside it. He pushed open the badly scratched transparent door and clambered out into a pedestrian passage. A row of trading kiosks with no end to it in sight, all the display windows smashed, filth everywhere, everything covered in graffiti. He didn't switch on his torch. A torch could be seen from a long way away. He wondered where the 4 stalkers had been taken out. 4 of them, all armed, with a radio. And not one of them had managed to say a damn word on that radio. He walked forward along the wall, past the kiosks. Who knew what they used to trade in here? Books. And smartphones, probably. There were so many of those smartphones in the metro. All the flea markets were choked with them. They sold them by the kilogram, and they were almost all dead. People had bought them somewhere. They bought them to call their nearest and dearest. Put that tiny flat box to your ear, and out comes your mother's voice. Artyom had once made Sukhoi buy him one like that at Peace Prospect, when he was still little. He played with it for 6 months, calling his mother at night from under the blanket until the batteries acidified. And then he made calls on the broken phone for another 3 years. But now, if you wanted to talk, then lug this box of tricks around with you. If only you could get through to the next world. If it could just call the next world, eh? He walked up the steps, squinting. Twilight. Hello, Moscow. The world unfolded in a cross. A huge square with 10-story buildings like the walls of a canyon, burnt and charred. Tverskaya Street crammed with rusty cars that had crashed into each other with their doors splayed out, as if they were trying to flutter those 4 doors like a dragonfly's wings, break free from the traffic jam and make their escape. Everything was gutted, seats torn out, trunks broken open. And the boulevard ring ran across Tverskaya Street, a black thicket. Naked, knotted roots reaching out along the ground towards each other from both sides, trying to close the circle, impatiently pushing aside the skeletons of the cars. Huge advertising hoardings on the buildings. Without old people's help, there was no way to tell what they were trying to sell. Watches, soft drinks, clothes, those crooked Latin letters, each the height of a man, didn't mean anything. Artyom wouldn't even have realized that they were advertisements if his seniors hadn't explained that to him. Gibberish. The memories of the demented, now the exposed roots and black branches, the wandering dogs, the tumbleweed and bones laid bare by looters could buy this gibberish. He took a closer look at the thickets. Was there anyone there? Better not go close. The city seemed dead, but someone here had gobbled up 4 fully equipped soldiers. It wasn't far to Teatralnaya station, only a 15-minute walk. That's what they'd thought, too. If hadn't happened to them here by the boulevards, then it must have happened somewhere up ahead. Should he walk along the buildings or down the middle? Moving straight along the road between the cars, he'd be too obvious. Walking along the pavement, he'd have to listen and watch all the time. The buildings might only look empty. Maybe everyone at exhibition knew Artyom, but here, he adjusted the hang of his automatic, took a grip on the stock, and stepped out along the pavement, past the huge 2-story-high shop windows. Everything out as far as the roadway was littered with fine debris, sprays of smashed glass, and various dummies lying there killed, some looking like human beings, and some looking like dark ones made of shiny black plastic, but faceless, with no noses or mouths, all lying there together. No one got away. A ransacked jewelry shop, a ransacked clothes shop, a ransacked and burnt-out God-knows-what shop. And the same thing on the other side of the road. A fine street, Tverskaya, good pickings. The people living in the local stations were lucky, but unfortunately there weren't any food shops. The buildings stood close packed in a solid wall, and the evening sky was settling down, laying the quilted jacket of its paunch straight onto them, making Tverskaya look like an immense tunnel, and the frozen metal torrent of the roadway looked like railway tracks to Artyom. In the jaws at the far end of this tunnel, the Museum of the Revolution flourished its towers like fangs, with the Kremlin's fangs at one side. The stars on them were extinguished. All their bewitching power had fizzled out, leaving only their vague black paper silhouettes against the dirty clouds. They made a dismal sight. After all, a walking corpse is more cheerful than the ordinary kind. And another thing, it was quiet. Absolutely quiet, the way it never was in the metro. What do you think, Jen? The city probably used to be noisy. It must have been noisy. All these cars growling away and sounding their horns at each other, and all those people clamoring away together, because every one of them needed to say what he wanted to say more than all the others did, and the echoes from these buildings as well, like from cliffs. But they've all shut up now. It turned out that none of it mattered. It's just a shame that not everyone got a chance to say goodbye, and they needn't have bothered to say all the rest of it at all. And then Artyom saw something ahead, on the pavement, not a shop dummy. Dummies can't lie like that. They're always contorted by convulsions like tetanus. Their arms don't bend, their legs jut out, their backs are like rigid sticks. But this one had huddled up tight like a little child, and died. Artyom looked round quickly. No one there. A black uniform protective suit, clutching an automatic rifle, his helmet knocked off, lying beside him, staring into the asphalt, into the dried-up blood. A hole in the back of his head. On a closer look, his stomach had leaked a lot too. A ribbon of blood ran across the ground. So they wounded him, then walked up and finished him as he crawled. And he was obviously in a really bad way, too busy trying not to die in order to crawl anymore, totally focused on it. He didn't even glance back to look into the faces of the men who had shot him. And they weren't interested either. That was the first, so no one had eaten them. And they hadn't taken his automatic. They'd spurned it. That was strange. Artyom squatted down and tried to take it, but the dead man's hands had turned stiff. He'd have to break the fingers. Okay, so keep your rod. He just unclipped the magazine and found the spare. That even gave him a kind of lift, as if Dietmar had paid him in advance for the operation. Stalkers don't believe in pillage. What stalkers believe is this: taking a dead man's gear is like remembering him in your prayers. Lying there with his gear is depressing and pointless for him anyway. He feels better knowing it will serve a good man. Artyom felt like moving on quickly. Where did this martyr get shot from? Why hadn't his 3 comrades stopped, picked the wounded man up, and carried him into cover? They couldn't have finished him off themselves, could they? Then why had they abandoned the service automatic? Were they in a hurry? He'd have to ask them that. But he didn't get a chance. The second was lying about 300 meters farther on his back like a star. He had wanted to take one last look at the sky, only he probably didn't see anything. One lens of his gas mask was shot through, and the other was flooded with something brownish on the inside, and there was a puddle under his back. The same thing then. First, they brought him down, then walked up for the coup de grace. His friends hadn't loitered here either. Artyom fancied he heard something in the distance. A gust of wind brought a droning sound, like a motor. He couldn't really tell. The air hummed too loudly in the filters. The gas mask rubber blocked his ears. Artyom quickly took the dead man's magazine, huddled close to the wall after all, and hurried on, gazing round. It was only half a kilometer now to Okotny Riyadh. Now he just had to avoid croaking anywhere himself. He didn't spot the third one immediately, and only with his peripheral vision. This one was cunning. He'd turned off the street and tried to hide in a restaurant. But how could he hide when all the walls were glass? They'd found him and riddled him with bullets, turned a man into a shapeless sack. They probably dragged him out from under a table and finished him. Now that was a sound, definitely. A roaring motor. Artyom held his breath. No, it didn't help. Then he pulled off his gas mask. Who cared what might happen in a year's time? He turned one ear toward the wind so it wouldn't prevent him from hearing. There it was again, a horse roaring. Someone stepping on the gas somewhere far away behind the buildings. A vehicle, operational. Who? Artyom took off like a bat out of hell. So that was how. That was why they ran and why they couldn't get away. They were overtaken and finished off one by one, which gave the others a lead of 200 or 300 meters. But then they got the next one. But why hadn't they fired back? Why hadn't they taken up position in a shop window and tried to fight them off? Were they still hoping to reach Teatralnaya? He didn't want to jolt the knapsack at first, but the roaring suddenly sounded quite distinctly behind his back, from straight along the tunnel of the street. And Artyom started bounding along, not looking round or stopping. Move it! Move it! If the jolting set off the blast, that wasn't as terrifying as if they winged him first and then came to finish him off. So let it go boom. And then the sound split in two. There were two motors, not one. One straight behind and the other apparently to one side. Apparently. One on one side of street and one on the other. Were they corralling along? Who could it be? Who? Should he hide? Dodge into a building? Run and take cover in an apartment? No. On this side of the street, there weren't any residential entrances. Nothing but shopfront fish tanks, burnt out and empty with no exits. Just a bit farther to the turn. Then there's Okotny Rayad. Then skirt round the Duma, and he'd be there. The fourth stalker wasn't anywhere on Tverskaya Street, so he must have made it to the turn. That meant Artyom could make it too. He had to make it. He saw his own shadow in front of him, long and pale, and a strip of light. They'd switched their headlights on behind him, or was it a searchlight? Someone pulled a length of barbed wire down through his throat into his lungs, pulled it down and jerked it backwards and forwards, using it like a bottle brush to clean out Artyom's bronchial tubes. He couldn't control the urge and looked back as he ran. It was an off-roader, a wide brute of an off-roader, tearing along the pavement. The road was choked with rusty metal. There was no way through. Then there was a squeal of brakes and it stopped. Something was blocking its way. Artyom took a gulp of cold air and turned the corner. And immediately he heard the other engine off to one side. A hoarse mosquito buzzing. A motorcycle. Ponderous and substantial, the State Duma was like an immense headstone, with its ground floor of gloomy granite and its stony gray upper sections. Who was buried under it? The motorcycle shot forward and hurtled along beside him. Without taking his eyes off the road, the rider flung out his left hand and fired a random, glittering burst that chattered along the gravestone walls, ricocheting. Artyom was spared. And then, without stopping or reducing speed, he also held out his bouncing automatic and blasted a burst somewhere in the general direction of the motorcyclist. A complete miss. But the rider stepped on the gas to avoid putting himself in the path of the blind bullets and shot off in order to swing round somewhere far away. The roaring started up again behind him. The off-roader had found a way through, but now Artyom only had a short distance left to cover to Teatralnaya station and the entrance. Only 100 meters. Is the entrance open, Lord? Lord Jesus, is the entrance open? If you exist, it must be open. Do you exist? The final fourth soldier was lying right in front of the doors. Not even lying, but sitting, with his back slumped against the locked panels of wood. Sitting there dejectedly, looking at his bullet-riddled stomach, at his hands, at the life that had flowed out through his fingers. Artyom darted up to the doors and tugged on one, then another and another. The hysterical motorcycle came back from its banking turn, getting louder and louder. Then the square off-roader drifted wide round the corner. Armor-plated, was it? Artyom had never seen any like that. No one in the metro could have any like that. None of the ragged-trousered subterranean empires had anything like it. He pressed his back against the doors and raised his automatic, trying to catch the narrow windscreen in the dancing sight. No point in even firing at something like that. A tiny figure appeared on the roof of the off-roader, like a target in a shooting gallery or a jack-in-a-box, a sniper. A bullet zipped by, making a neat hole in the glass. That was it, the end, he was done for. He fired a wild burst. An entire bracket of floodlights lit up on the roof of the off-roader, lashing at his eyes and blinding him. Now he couldn't even take aim unless he fired up into the air. This was the end. It would all be over in a moment. Just as soon as the sniper caught Artyom in his little circle, Artyom screwed up his eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4. The motorcycle shot out to a convenient distance and spluttered into silence. Artyom tried to get a peep, shading his eyes with his hand. No, both vehicles were undamaged, just standing motionless, and Artyom was standing in their crossed beams of light. "Hey, don't fire," he called out to them in a squeaky voice. He put his hands up. "Take me prisoner, please." They couldn't give a damn what he was croaking about. They consulted soundlessly among themselves and refused to take him prisoner. Who are you?" 67, 68, 69. Suddenly, the motorcycle darted away with a puff of blue petrol fumes and zoomed off out of sight. Then the armored car did the same, doused its searchlights, reversed, swung round, and disappeared into the twilight. So you exist after all, eh, don't you? Or else what the fuck was that? In his joy and disbelief, he prodded the last poor bastard, the fourth one, with his boot. "You didn't get lucky like that, eh?" The man slumped and slid down the door. He had a bag with wires sticking out of it on his side. A mine. "I could have punished you for that right now," he told Artyom. "Don't rile me." Artyom apologized, but he didn't repent. He remembered something and frisked the dead man. Then he ran round the vestibule. Come on, before the guys in the armored car changed their minds. He tugged on all the doors again. At least one of them had to be open. And he found it on the other side. He clambered inside and ran straight down the slippery steps before he squatted down to catch his breath. Only there did he start believing he wasn't about to die, that he wasn't going to die right now. The steps had led him to a chamber with turnstiles and a ticket office. There were two ways out, down the empty, sagging escalator to Okotny Riyadh station and along a gallery to somewhere, to Teatralnaya station. Artyom's worst fear was that the Reds could have set up a patrol here, and it would finish off what the guys in the off-roader had started. But the connecting passage wasn't guarded. Apparently, they just locked the hermetic gates down below at the station and didn't even come up to the surface to avoid getting poisoned, just like back home at exhibition. Artyom took out the mine and looked at it. How could it be activated? The mine was as stupid and ugly as power. It was power, granted to Artyom over a still uncounted number of people. What should he do with it? A jog along the corridor to the entrance of Teatralnaya station. Everything there was closed, blocked off and walled up too, but a door had been left so that stalkers could go up on top. Artyom squeezed into his gas mask and hammered on that door with all his manic strength. Someone took 5 minutes climbing up from below. Then they didn't want to open up and interrogated Artyom from behind the shutter. They didn't believe he was alone. Eventually, they opened up a little crack for his ID, and Artyom thrust the passport he had confiscated from the dead man into it. "Open up and quick! Open up, or I'll complain to the ambassador! Open up, I say, do you hear? I almost got bumped off out here. An active service officer of the Reich. It'll be on your head. Open up, you bastard!" They opened up, and they didn't even make him take off his gas mask to check his face against the passport. It's good to have an entire ogre's state behind you. It's good when you stride along and an iron legion marches in step with you. You can live with confidence. Artyom didn't let the sentries gather their wits, didn't let them inspect the knapsack. He grabbed the passport back and tumbled down the stairs. He just shouted to them over his shoulder that he had an important mission, and lackeys like them didn't need to know any more about it. As soon as he reached the bottom, he turned a corner and hid in order to shed his skin like a snake, changing the green protective one for his own usual one. He tucked the rubber away somewhere temporarily, but didn't abandon the radio set. In 40 minutes, he had to contact Dietmar. That meant he had 40 minutes here to find Pyotr Sergeyevich Umbach, the man who had heard on the airwaves that people had survived somewhere else too, and yank that man out of this station before the Reds, or the Browns, came bursting in. Artyom peeped out to see if they were chasing him. No, they weren't. They'd already forgotten about Artyom and gone back to their own business. They probably had more important business than arresting saboteurs. What could that be? And that was when he remembered what Teatralnaya station was all about. The small, cozy, low central hall of the station, with its ceiling quilted in rhomboids like a bedspread, was the auditorium of a theater, almost completely filled with seats and also with tables. At the front, closer to the stage, hidden by the closed velvet curtains. The arches were also curtained off, only not with velvet, but with whatever could be found. The rectangles of the route indicators hanging from the ceiling glowed with dull, ineffectual light, but the list of stations had been replaced by a flamboyant inscription, "Welcome to the Bolshoi Theater." The people here lived in metro trains standing on both tracks. One had actually been standing at the station when all the electricity in the world was cut off, and another had just stuck its nose into the tunnel on its way to Novokuznetsk. It had all worked out pretty snugly, better than scaffolding above water, and better than social housing with hell on the other side of the wall. Although these trains didn't go anywhere and the view from their windows was always the same, either gray stone or straight into the ground, the locals led a light-hearted life. They laughed, joked, and pinched each other on the backside without taking offense, as if they were simply waiting in their carriages for the driver to apologize at any moment over the loudspeakers for the 20-year delay. And then the train would set off and, without getting lost anywhere, arrive at the next station, and also, of course, at the very day from which they had set out, the last day before the end of the world. And in the meantime, they'd gotten the hang of living here. Grubby children were running around, all bright and quick-witted. They fought using plastic insulation piping as swords, flung convoluted phrases torn out of some half-decayed plays at each other, battled to the death, giggling and squealing over a stolen cardboard stage prop painted with gouache. The people here, however many there were, all lived off the theater. Some acted, some painted scenery, some fed the customers, some ushered out the drunks. Bespectacled women wandered the platforms, fanning themselves with swatches of tickets, touting them in cracked, trembling voices. Today's performance, the final seats. They walked over to the edge of the platform and glanced into the tunnel to Novokuznetsk. How many more fools would it bring them? But Artyom felt an urge to go to the other end and look in the opposite direction. At the other end, both tunnels led to Tver station, to the Reich. Somewhere there in the darkness, the columns in black uniforms had already been drawn up, ready to march, and were waiting. It would take them 15 minutes at a goose step, and if they flew in on a petrol-powered trolley, only 2. After Artyom told Dietmar over the radio that everything was ready, 2 minutes would go by, and the avant-garde assault units would be here. At the center of the hall, 2 stairways ran off in opposite directions above the tracks. Both led to passages to Red Line stations. One to Okhotny Ryad, to which the Communists had given back its old name of Marx Prospect. The other to Revolution Square, which used to be part of the Arbat-Pokrovsk line. But after the first war with Hansa, the Reds had traded Lenin Library for it. Both passages were fenced off with movable metal barriers. Standing behind each barrier were several Red Army men in washed-out green uniforms and an officer wearing a peaked cap. Their cap badges were enamel stars that age had turned raspberry red. They stood facing each other, 10 paces apart, swapping jokes. But those 10 paces were the territory of a neutral station over which they had no authority. And in addition, even up in the gallery, they were part of the audience of the Bolshoi Theater. That was how Teatralnaya lived, squeezed between the Red Line's 2 neighboring outposts and the Reich, between the hammer and the anvil. But somehow it had always managed to rebound from the blows of fate, spinning round and deceiving the cold iron, avoiding war and preserving its neutrality. It had managed to do that for a long time, until this very day. And seemingly only Artyom could sense the stormy electrical charge in the air today. The others didn't understand. They couldn't see the imminent and inexorable bloodbath. Strolling along beside the stranded trains with their young ladies, railway officers on leave with swastikas on their sleeves managed to pass quite amicably by faded green officers with raspberry red stars who had just been toasting the health of Comrade Moskvin, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Lenin Metropolitan, in the theater buffet, only 1 step away. They all had tickets jutting out of their breast pockets in the same way. All of them were getting ready to go to the show. Ah, no, not all of them. Some of them were getting ready to do something else. When the signal came, cut off the passages to Okhotny Ryad and slit people's throats. In addition to the central passage, there were 2 others. One at the rear of the station, at the very end of the platform, and another up above, via the vestibule. It was difficult to block off all 3 instantaneously. Dietmar's idea was audacious, but Artyom's own goal was twice as difficult to achieve. Since that conversation beside the toilet, Dietmar hadn't left Artyom alone with Homer for a single second. The old man hadn't been able to tell him what the radio operator looked like, or what kind of work he did, or where he lived. So now find him, Artyom, whoever he is, wherever he is, and in half an hour. Excuse me. He stuck his head into a compartment belonging to strangers. Does Pyotr Sergeyevich live? Umbach? Who? I've never heard of... My mistake. He butted into the next compartment. Pyotr Sergeyevich? Umbach? I'm his nephew. I'll call the guards. Barging into people's homes. Tanya, are the spoons locked away? You know where you can stick those spoons, you stupid fool. He walked past another 2 doors, looking back just in case. Pyotr Sergeyevich, do you know where I can find him? What? Umbach, Pyotr Sergeyevich, the technician, my uncle. Technician? Uncle? Eh? A radio operator, I think. Does he live here? I don't know any radio operator. There's Pyotr Sergeyevich, who works as an engineer in the theater. With the stage, well, you know what I mean. Can you tell me where to find him? Look for him there, that's the place to ask. Well, the director's place, God almighty. Why are you so thick-headed? Good luck to you. Bugger off. Can't do anything for themselves. Fuck it, these young people. In the hall, the musicians started tweedling away, warming up. Artyom darted towards the entrance, and the usherette almost bit him on the hand. I can't go letting everyone in for free. Nothing sacred any longer, you lout. This is the Bolshoi Theater. He had to run back and buy a ticket, paying with the cartridges that the dead men had lent him. As he bought it, he kept looking round. Somewhere here, somewhere among the promenading public, among the people who had come to the show from Novokuznetsk or wherever else, from all over the metro, there were 2 scattered groups of saboteurs. Somewhere there were bombers pretending to be theater lovers. Perhaps somewhere there were even suicide bombers playing at being fathers of families, for instance, but already wearing explosive belts. When they got the signal that it was time to die for the Reich, they'd walk up, sweating, to the Red Line's border posts and dash into the passages like bats out of hell. And 15 minutes later, the assault teams of the Iron Legion would come bursting in from the 2 tunnels. He looked at his watch, and he realized that if he did everything on time, it would be right in the middle of the play. That wasn't Artyom's calculation, it was Dietmar's. So after Artyom had managed not to die up on the surface, everything was going precisely according to Dietmar's plan. But if Artyom didn't do anything, Homer would hang. And instead of the fascists, the Reds would enter Titrolnaya station only tomorrow instead of today. It seemed like one man could change the world, but only just a little bit. The world was as heavy as a metro train. You couldn't really shift it too far. He dashed back to the female Cerberus at the gate and stuck the ticket in her teeth, and he tipped cartridges into her pocket too. The cartridges made her glasses mist over, and through the mist she didn't see him sneak into the auditorium first, ahead of the rest of the audience. He walked briskly past the 2 Red Army posts without looking the soldiers in the eye, so that they wouldn't remember him. Then he went up onto the stage and stuck his face in through the velvet. It was dark behind the curtain. In the shallow space of the stage he could just make out the form of some kind of gazebo, or perhaps a rather vaguely painted ancient temple. Artyom touched it. Plywood. He heard voices from behind the plywood, as if it was possible to enter it and live there. Well, believe me, I'd like to put on something different. You don't think I'm happy with our present repertoire, do you? But you have to understand that in our situation... I don't want to understand anything, Arkady. I'm tired of all this balderdash. If there was another theater anywhere in the metro, in the world, I'd leave here without a second thought. And God knows, I'm absolutely not in the mood to go on today. Don't say that. What can I do? I wanted to stage Ionesco's Rhinoceros, a fine play in every way. And also, an important point, there are no costumes apart from a rhinoceros's head, and that can be made out of paper. And then I realized we couldn't do it. What's the play about, after all? It's about normal people turning into animals under the influence of ideology. How can we put on something like that? The Reich will think it's about them, and so will the Reds. And that will be it. A boycott, at the very least. Or something even worse. And then, these people with rhinoceroses' heads... In the Reich, they'd be sure to see a parallel with the freaks. They'd think we were mocking their fear of mutations. Good God, Arkady, that's paranoia. Artyom took a cautious step forward. Several small rooms appeared. A dressing room, a cubbyhole with stage props, and another one that was locked. Do you think I'm not searching for material? I search constantly, all the time. But take the classics, Hamlet, for instance. Open it and what do you see there? Me? The question is, what do you see? The question is, what do our spectators from the red line see there? A neat little plot. Hamlet learns that his father was killed by his own brother. By Hamlet's uncle, that is. Doesn't that remind you of anything? They were arguing in the closed room. But in the cubbyhole beside it, an old man with gray hair and a droopy mustache was sitting hunched over a table and soldering something with his eyes watering from the smoke. This was more or less how Artyom had pictured the man called Umbach. I haven't got a clue. How about the death of the previous general secretary of the line, in the prime of life? And how was he related to Moskvin? He was his first cousin. Only a blind idiot could fail to spot the hint. Is that what we want? Listen, Olga, we simply don't have any right to provoke them. That's all they're waiting for, them and the others. Artyom stood in the opening of the cubbyhole where the man with the droopy mustache was sitting. The man sensed his presence and gave him an inquiring look. Pyotr Sergeyevich? Suddenly he heard footsteps drumming fiercely and screeching as the steel tips of the boots scraped the floor. Somewhere in the hall, several men, not saying anything. Artyom hunkered down and turned one ear so that it could hear through the velvet. You're simply a coward, Arkasha. A coward. Any play is too risky for you, whoever we take on. Remind me, will you, why we can't even put on the pitiful seagull. The pitiful, absolutely innocent seagull. At least a decent role could be found for me in that. Because it was written by Chekhov. Chekhov, just like the cherry orchard. So what? So it's Chekhov and not Wagner. I'm absolutely certain that our neighbors from Wagner Station would think it was a swipe at them, that we had deliberately chosen Chekhov in order to spite them. The footsteps scattered rapidly round the hall. 2 of you watch the hall, and 4 get up on the stage. Someone whispered in Artyom's ear. The radio operator must be here. Artyom pressed one finger to his lips imploringly, dropped to the floor, and half crept, half rolled away at random, and by a lucky chance, he found a gap under the stage. They were looking for the radio operator, and for him. The sentries hadn't tried to catch him immediately. They'd reported to someone. The security police. If only the old man with the mustache didn't give him away. The 2 people arguing behind the closed door didn't hear the footsteps. And a streetcar named Desire? I could have played Stella. The whole storyline in that is based on Blanche feeling ashamed of her appearance and hiding away in a dark room. I don't understand. Haven't you heard about the Führer's wife? Idle gossip. My dear Olenka, now listen to me. People will come to see you, won't they? They have come. The tickets are sold out. Can I give you a hug? You coward. You lout. We put on a neutral show. Do you understand that? Neutral. A show that can't hurt anyone's feelings. Art shouldn't offend anyone. It's meant to console them. It's supposed to arouse the very best in them. Artyom's arms had turned numb. His back was starting to hurt. Slowly and cautiously, he moved the wrist with his watch on it towards a slanting beam of light. He looked at the dial. In 10 minutes, he had to go on air, tell Dietmar the mine had been installed, and carry out his next order. The woman's voice jangled. And what do you think I arouse in them, eh? I understand what you mean, but after all, in Swan Lake, the ballerinas used to go on stage with their legs naked. Ah, if only we could put on Swan Lake. But we've been told quite clearly that the people regard Swan Lake as a hint at putsches and coups d'etat. The situation is strained enough as it is. We mustn't irritate either side. And then, your pretty legs. Those pretty legs of yours. You animal. You rhinoceros. Just tell me that you'll go on today. Tell me you will perform. The girls from the Corps de Ballet will be here any moment. Are you screwing one of them? Have you been screwing Zinka? My God, what stupid nonsense. I talked to her about art and she... Why fritter away my time on petty little whores when I'm in love with the prima? And why are you jabbering to me about art, eh, you lousy rhinoceros? Tell me the truth. You know how sick and tired I am of this neutrality, of the fact that art, blah, blah, blah. At this stage, I'd like the boss to get shafted by... Do you understand me? One or the other of them. Don't start that now. There's not enough time left. It could be the Reds, or it could be the Browns, but at least let it be one of them. I understand you. There's no need for that. Yes, there is. There's not enough time. There was a hiss right above Artyom's ear, and someone clumsy shuffled his feet and grunted. Whoever it might be, and whoever he might have come for, he was standing right outside the closed door and eavesdropping intently. There were 6 minutes left to radio contact. Yes, there is. Let it be one or the other of them. My God, whose idea was it that art should be independent? You're tickling my ear, Arkasha. Whose idea was it that an artist should go hungry? Some idiot or other? I agree. And you know, I'd like more clarity too. No ambiguity. A firm basis. That's what I'd like. You understand me then? Let them support us, but let them give us a firm set of rules. Let them appoint a censor, but let it be just one of them. Then, for instance, we could put on Streetcar and Seagull. Or on the contrary, Hamlet and... Oh, yes, yes. A consolation, you understand. Art for us, you and me. Hush. Like that. A knock at the door. Good evening, Arkady Pavlovich. The voice was hoarse and low and strangely familiar to Artyom. Who is it? Who's there? My God. Oh, and Olga Konstantinovna is there too. Will you open up? Oh, Comrade Major, Gleb Ivanitch, what brings you here? One moment. One moment. To what do we owe the honor? We were just making up Olga Konstantinovna here, before the performance. I'm opening the door now. Artyom could see through a crack. 4 pairs of steel-tipped high boots and a pair of low boots with laces. The door opened. Oh, what's going on? Surely you don't have the right to be here with armed men. Gleb Ivanitch, this is a neutral station. Naturally, we're always glad to see you as a guest. But what's going on? In exceptional cases, and this is definitely an exceptional case, we received a warning message. There's a spy in hiding at this station. Here's the document. It's all official from the Committee of State Security. We know that he's in illegal radio contact with the enemy and planning an act of sabotage. Artyom completely stopped breathing. For some reason, it occurred to him that none of the stalkers who'd been shot on the surface had a radio with him. He had found a mine, but the radio set had disappeared. Do you have anyone here who owns radio equipment? Where are you going? Halt! Your documents! A voice rumbled in the next room. Hold him! Who's that in there? One of our colleagues, a technician, Pyotr Sergeyevich. Where are you going, Pyotr Sergeyevich? There was a crash and a groan. The crack showed Umbach, flung down on his knees. One outstretched wing of his drooping mustache was pinned down by a lace-up boot. Artyom prayed that Umbach wouldn't look down into the darkness under the stage. That in his fear, Umbach would forget to sell Artyom to the boots and buy his own life with the proceeds. Right then, lads. Take a look at what kind of junk he has heaped up in there. That's professional equipment. I'm an engineer. We know who you are. We got a tip-off about you. Been planning terrorist attacks? God forbid, I'm an engineer, a technician in the theater. Take this mumbling idiot along. He'll go in the Lubyanka. I protest. Arkady's determination gave his voice a squeaky note. Take him, take him. Come here, Arkady Pavlovich, just for a second. The voices moved farther away across the stage, but the quietly hissed words were very clear. Listen, you piece of scum. Who's this you've been sheltering here? Do you think it would be any bother for us to grab you at the same time? You could take a ride to the far end of the red line and no one here would ever miss you. And Olenka. Your Olenka. Touch her again and I'll cut your dick off. And your balls, myself, I know how. You fucking juvenile lead, go screw your corpse to ballet and don't even dare look at Olga. Have you got that? Do you understand me, you shit? Say yes, sir, Comrade Major. Yes, sir, Gleb Ivanitch. All right, go, take a walk. Where to? Anywhere you like. Move it. The stage creaked above Artyom's head, forlorn, lost footsteps. Arkady Pavlovich didn't know where to go. Then he jumped down onto the ground, swore, and shuffled away miserably. It turned quiet. They had already got Umbach to his feet and led him away, and the steel-tipped boots had all galloped out of Artyom's field of view. And what was more, he had missed the time to contact Dietmar. Another knock at the door. A different knock this time. Crude and masterful without any pretense. Olga. Gleb, I'm so glad. I was standing outside the door, and she's glad, the bitch. Oh, Gleb. He blackmails me, doesn't give me any decent parts. First one thing, then another. He keeps me on a short leash and fobs me off with promises. Shut up, come here. They slurped loudly and lusciously, then pulled themselves apart with an audible effort. Right then, I'll come tonight. I've got executions this evening. We're going to top a few traitors, and after that business, I always fancy something sweet. So badly it sets my teeth on edge. Make sure you're here waiting for me, all right, and wearing a tutu. I understand, I'll be here. And make sure no one else is here. Not that Arkasha of yours, or, of course, Gleb, of course, but what kind of traitors are they? We caught a priest. He was preaching, and the others are defectors. The mushrooms on the line are all ruined, some kind of plague. So the wimps have started running. They remember being bloated with hunger last year. Never mind. They won't run far. We'll top a few of them as an example, and the rest will soon settle down. All right, as a woman, that's none of your concern. You just give yourself a good dousing and don't ask any questions. And don't forget the tutu. Yes, sir. The Major gave her a fruity slap on the backside, thundered across the stage with his heels, jumped down heavily onto the granite, and disappeared into nowhere, into the same abyss that had belched him out. Artyom went on lying there, waiting. Would she cry? Would she have hysterics or a fit of convulsions? Would she call her Arkady back? She started singing, Toreador, en garde. Allons, allons. Ladies and gentlemen, and now, permit me to present to you the superstar of the Bolshoi Theater, Olga Eisenberg. Some kind of wind instrument struck a sad, beautiful note, and Olga Eisenberg, with her long legs that were absolutely unsuited to life in the catacombs, walked out onto the stage and across to a pole. He couldn't see her face from backstage, only a shadowy outline in China ink, but even the shadow was incredible. She made her entry in a long dress, and the first thing she did, before throwing her glorious legs round the pole, was to take the dress off. Artyom laid out the segments of his aerial on the floor and arranged it to point towards where he imagined Tver Station ought to be. He pulled on the headphones and clicked the switch. He didn't have the time or the courage to go pushing his way through the jam-packed hall with the radio set on his shoulders, arguing with the sentries and crawling up the escalator. He just hoped the signal would reach Tver Darwin's station along the tunnel. Let it get there. Come in! Come in! There was a rustling, choking sound in his head, and then mercy was granted. Oh, stalker! And here we are already measuring up your old man for a necktie. You're late. Cancel the operation. Come in. They're not planning to take Teatralnaya. Come in. They've got famine on their line. They're putting up those checkpoints to catch defectors. Dietmar made an indistinct sort of sound, either hawking something up or grunting. Do you think you've just made me any wiser? What? Where's the mine, you cretin? Have you installed the mine? Didn't you hear me? There isn't going to be any invasion of Teatralnaya. What do you mean? Now it became clear that Dietmar was laughing. Of course there is. Most certainly there is.